as Cassie gets the PowerPoint up and running. And our first order of business is that this meeting is being recorded. So CTF members, just an FYI, and if you're joining in, watching the live stream or watching this recording later, cool, thanks, we're glad that you're here. CTF members, I'm getting a little bit of feedback from folks. If you can mute yourself if you're not speaking, that'll help us limit any ambient noise. Also, when we're in presentation mode, it's totally cool with me if you turn off your cameras. You might be eating dinner, enjoying some downtime with a pet. So feel free to turn those cameras off if you feel more comfortable. But when we come back together for discussion, and we'll be having a discussion portion towards the end of our meeting tonight, it really helps me if you can turn your cameras on. So this is our 23rd Community Task Force meeting. So thanks for joining us. Let's go to the next slide. Folks, I think you also know these, but you can virtually raise your hands, and I'll be watching for those, but sometimes I miss them. So if you would like to, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to use that chat. I'll also be pausing for questions and comments at key parts of the meeting, but to go ahead and get started there by raising your hand or typing into the chat if you do have something that you'd like to say. Liz, as always, is on hand to help with any technical support as needed. So Liz is around. Her email and phone number are on the screen, and she'll also put them in the chat in case you're experiencing any technical difficulties. All right, let's go to the next slide. So today we are doing our regular housekeeping, and then we're having a quick bridge types review, a little bit more of a refresher for everyone. And the bulk of our meeting will be looking at the evaluation criteria development and continuing that conversation as it moves forward. We'll also save some time for discussion at the end, and we are hoping to get out of here at 8:30. If we are at a critical point where we're asking for the CTF to approve something or give us a sense that this is moving in the right direction, there might be a possibility that we extend the meeting slightly just to make sure that all of our business gets done today, but we are going to do our best to keep everything on time and to get you back out and enjoying your Monday, excuse me, an 8 o'clock p.m. time. Thank you, Cassie, for that clarification. I was saying 8:30, 8 o'clock, not 8:30, 8 o'clock, my mistake. But we will try our best to end on time. And if we do need to extend for any reason, because we're having particularly robust discussion, I'll check with folks before we make a call. So that's our meeting for today. I think our next slide is, yes, our introductions. So if we can just go down the list and you can unmute yourself and say your name and the organization or interest that you're here on behalf of this evening. That'll help us know that everybody's microphones are working as well. So Amy, I think you're here. Amy, you want to say hello?
Yeah. Hi, guys. Amy Rothfelder. I'm the Director of Government Affairs for the Portland Business Alliance, and it's good to see all of you.
Thanks, Amy. Hey, Art.
Hi, Art Graves with the Multnomah County Bike and Ped Citizen Advisory Committee.
You're going to sit by Amy. Dennis, are you here?
Yes. Good evening. Dennis Corwin.
Thanks, Dennis, with the Portland Spirit. And how about Ed and, we got 2 for 1, Ed and Sharon.
We're here.
We're here. Both here.
All right, Ed and Sharon Wortman are here. Fred?
Yeah, hello, Fred Cooper, representing Laurelhurst neighborhood.
Gabe? Are you here? If you're speaking, you're muted. I think I saw Gabe earlier, but how about over to Howie?
Howie Bierbaum, Executive Director, Portland Saturday Market. Hello, everyone.
Hello. Jackie, are you in the room? I think Jackie might be out today, but just a check. Okay, how about over to Jane?
Hi, everyone. Jane Gordon from University of Oregon.
Thanks. And I think Jennifer is also not here this evening, but over to Marie.
Hi, good evening. Marie Dodds, AAA Oregon, Idaho.
Hello, Marie. Neil?
Hi, this is Neil Jensen with the Gresham Area Chamber of Commerce.
Hello.
Paul Lightman with Oregon Walks.
Peter Englander?
Peter Englander, Old Town Community Association.
Hi, it's Peter Finley Fry with Central East Side Industrial Council. Good evening.
Hello, Peter Finley Fry. I think we might be getting quite a bit of feedback from your microphone, so we might have Liz check in with you. Sounded a little bit like a robot in the background, so let's make sure that doesn't happen. How about over to Stella?
Stella Butler with the Gresham or Coalition of Gresham Neighborhood Associations.
Hi, Stella. Susan.
Hi, everybody. Good evening. Susan Lindsay, co-chair of the Buckman Community Association.
Tasha?
Tasha Eisenberg, Mercy Corps.
And Bill.
Yeah, Bill Berger with the Portland Freight Committee.
Thanks, Bill. Great. Well, I think that is our group for this evening. And next up is typically public comment. We did not receive any public comment for this evening's meeting, but if you're watching this and you'd like to submit public comment, we always welcome those before or after the meetings, and those can be noted in this period verbally with the committee and circulated via email. So send in your comments if you have them. Otherwise, we'll just keep things moving and move into the next part, which is a project update. So I'm going to pass it over to Heather to tell us a little bit more about the DEIS statement.
Thank you, Allison. So I'm just going to take a moment to provide an update on the draft environmental impact statement, which I know we've been talking about now for a while. On the next slide, I just want to highlight that we are hoping, fingers crossed, to have it published the first Friday of February. So I believe that is February 5th. Once it is published, you will all be receiving a notification. So watch out in your email inboxes for the next couple of weeks so that you can share your findings, or so that you can see the findings on the draft EIS. There will be a link to an online open house where you can learn more about what's in the EIS. There will be links to the draft EIS and all of the technical documents, and there will be several ways which you can provide comments. And so those can be through voicemail, emails, comment forms. You can write a letter if you're feeling like that's what you're in the mood to do. And we'll also have an in-person hearing. So on the next slide, I just want to highlight that what's in the draft EIS. I think you've seen all of these technical reports before, but as I mentioned, along with the draft EIS, these technical reports will all be available. They are quite lengthy, and so we have prepared one-page summary sheets that will also be available. So if there's a specific interest area you have, I would say maybe go check those summary sheets out and see if they give you the information that you're interested in. If not, certainly you can dive deeper into the technical reports themselves. So as we're publishing the draft EIS on the next slide, just want to acknowledge that there is that 45-day comment period. So get your comments in during that period. We'll have the start and end date of that in the information that we send. Once that comment period commences, we'll be working as the team to resolve all of those comments to finalize our mitigation approaches, and then ultimately publish our final EIS and get our record of decision in late fall of 2021. So that, I think, was what I had for the draft EIS. And the last thing I just want to mention is everyone should have received the invitation to our outreach for our bridge type selection. This was super exciting, so I hope you all have a time to get on and check out the online open house and survey. There's some videos in there. I think there's some really cool graphics, but this is really the outreach that we're asking the public about the bridge types that you have all recommended to date, as well as your criteria, so that we can bring that back to you before you make your formal recommendation to the policy group, so you have the opportunity to hear what the public is thinking. And Allison, I think that's what I had to cover for tonight on those.
Well, thanks, Heather. And I believe that's also where you can find that awesome video of Mike Pullen doing his thing, which is pre-meeting chatter we're all very excited about. Continuing on, the working groups are continuing to meet. So the Urban Design and Aesthetics Working Group that I know has been of particular interest to a number of folks here is meeting again soon in February. And they'll be continuing to, with their charge of giving feedback to this group on some of the design choices in the type selection and their recommendation on the type selection evaluation criteria. We also recently had a meeting of the social services and DEI work. It was 2-in-1 social services and DEI working group to give some updates and to also share some feedback on potential ways to mitigate impacts to social service providers in the area and to look with a lens on equity. I don't know if Steve or Mike, if you want to add in anything more about any of the working groups. I know you've been whirlwind road show with these kinds of working group meetings. So anything you want to update the group on?
Yeah, maybe I'll go first. Yeah, this was a meeting about, it was attended mostly by the social service agencies. We appreciate Peter Englander and Stella Funk Butler were also there. We're focusing on information that the agencies are going to need to know and about mitigation for during the construction phase. And they reminded us that having passes, TriMet bus passes for clients that need help getting across the river is something that they're interested in and have experience with. So that was something we talked about. That's, I think, going to be a big deal once we get closer to construction. But it was a good meeting, pretty good turnout. Thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Mike. And a lot of these other groups, you can see the dates there, will be continuing to meet in February and March, and the team will be giving you updates as they do and as is relevant to your work ahead. So a quick update there. And I think we're going to continue.
Actually, one other thing, Allison, sorry to go back with it. So maybe focus on the multimodal working group line item. So we're in the midst of scheduling that out. There's going to be a doodle poll going out to that. We're going to be focusing our attention on the access ways, the connections to the bridge from either the East Bank Esplanade or on the west side, somewhere else in and around the Transit Max station. So that's going to be the focus of those meetings. There's a number of options that we're looking at, whether it's ramps or stairs and elevators, mid-block crossing, so meaning a signalized crossing over the bridge. And so we're going to be looking at a series of those options at that multimodal working group based on a lot of coordination that's happening behind the scenes. So for those that are interested in that topic, that's going to be the place where we're going to be talking about that. So wanted to highlight that particular point.
Thanks, Steve. All right, so I think it's about the time where we're going to hear from Steve again. But just to let folks know what's coming up, you've seen a lot of this information before, and it is all in your packet. I believe that Steve might have a couple of places where there's new information or things that are continuing to evolve in the bridge type selection process. So he'll point those out for you, but we are going to go pretty quickly through these. So there'll be some pauses, and Steve is going to remind us of some of the things, but if it's going quick, just remember that you've seen a lot of this before, and it is in your packet, and we will pause for some Q&A at the end before we get more into criteria pieces. So Steve, over to you.
Yes, so I have sworn an oath that I was going to do this in no more than 10 to 15 minutes. So there's a lot of slides, but again, this is what you guys have all generally seen before. Think of these slides as starter soup for the conversation about the evaluation that's going to come next. And I picked and chose the slides that we're showing to highlight interests. What are those key interests that we've heard from you guys? And then how are these various interests and potential trade-offs reflected in the criteria? So this isn't meant to present new information or dive into some details. This is meant to highlight a particular trade-off or interest that you're going to talk about a lot once you get to the criteria. So with that, we've all seen the 3 bridges in one concept. The whole point of this is continuity. How does this bridge work both independently for each of the span locations, the users of each location, and then at the end come together and look like a bridge that's in harmony? There's 3 bridges in one. Next slide. So to do that, we've looked at a series of different options: tied arch, cable supported truss with the movable bridge. You guys have all seen this before. On the next few slides, we have highlighted those elevation views that give this distinguishing difference between the different types. So again, the tied arch with and without a girder span on the far west side. Some of the criteria is going to ask about cohesion and unity. And so as you're looking at these, does one of these types seem to fit better with the overall flow? Or is this trade-off about vertical clearances and views more important? And how do you want to think through those differences? So this is with the bascule option that's open in the middle. Then you have these same variations on the next slide with the lift option. And then how does the lift option maybe obstruct a view or obstruct or frame an entryway, a gateway from one side to the other? Is that a value that is something that you would want to see? Or is it really just feel awkward and sort of bold and an obstruction in and of itself? So we're going to be asking you to weigh in some of the criteria with these thoughts in mind with the tight arch bridge. As we go to the next set of slides, it's a reminder about the truss and what's the difference in the truss versus the tight arch. The truss is a little bit shorter, but it also feels maybe a little bit more enclosed because of the thickness of its members and the height, versus maybe a truss on one side and a girder on the west side, where you can have, again, the clearances above the deck in the historic district area, where it might make more sense in combination with a bascule, or, as the next slide shows, the vertical lift. And then how does the truss work with the vertical lift option? On the next couple of slides, we develop graphics for a cable stack. Oh, I'm sorry. And so this graphic points out the differences between the tight arch concept and the truss concept, noting the difference in height on the west side, but also noting the difference in view, the visibility through the structure, and how slender does one maybe feel compared to the other just because of the dimensions of 3-foot thick vertical diagonals versus maybe 3-inch thick network tight arch, these cables. Now we'll go to the next slide. So then we looked at the graphics for the cable supported. And what does it look like to have a cable structure on either side of the river, framing into a bascule, noting that the towers are different heights. Because again, you're not going to have a purely symmetric bridge in terms of tower height because the span lengths are so different, but you have something similar on either side, or like is shown in the bottom, this girder option that really keeps the view shed open above the bridge, but with the trade-off again of putting that column in the middle of Waterfront Park. And then, so this is with the bascule bridge, and then you can look at this with a tower, with a lift structure. And does adding the notion of the lift bridge change the look, feel of this particular option? Again, one of the principal trade-offs between the bascule and the lift is that the bascule has a larger mass in the river, but the lift has the larger mass above the deck. So there's a trade-off in where that mass location is. And we're going to be asking through the criteria, how important is having the mass at some location? Does it make more sense to put it lower or put it higher, given that there's this sort of trade-off in where the mass is located? All right, next slide. So then we get to other, key interests, and it comes back to views and how is the view of the bridge being shaped from locations like other bridges or from the parks, and what about the views from on the bridge, whether you have this open deck idea or you're looking at views through or out from the bridge deck with a superstructure above. So there's these combinations of how the views and the bridge uses vary depending on the bridge type. All right, next slide. Another key interest on top of just the views on the bridge is the use of the bridge itself. Just like we've seen many people have used the Burnside Bridge lately to cross during the protests, and how the bridge is used and the space of the bridge itself really has a difference when you're thinking about girder style versus either the above deck options. So the assessment of the use of public space is really going to be important, as well as this transition to gateways. As you're moving from one community to another, one neighborhood to another, downtown to the east side, how important is it? How much of a value is it to have this sort of gateway signature entrance as you're progressing from one side to the other. All right, next slide. And the overall connectivity between these different points, the city itself and the east side. And then, which is a little bit more difficult to see, but how, again, the bikeway frames into it. And so there is some interest to talk about the neighborhood connections that go with the various bridge options. All right, next slide. So then when we move to Waterfront Park, there are distinct trade-offs that come with each of the different options. So in these pictures, it's the girder option, which in and of itself provides that clear view above the bridge, both for users on the bridge and for people at the park looking towards the bridge. And then where is the support? Is it near Natal Parkway, where you have more space within the park, but a deeper structure and therefore less vertical clearance, or shifting that support towards Waterfront Park and having a little more vertical clearance, a little more balanced look. So there's different styles and levels of distinctiveness, and at the same time, different levels of conformity with the historic district that's on the west side. And so how well do these different bridge types frame into a historic district? Next slide, please. With the tide arch, again, you have similar question about where could a support be located, but it's very different what's happening above the deck. You get more clearance with a tide arch, and we've talked about that 25 feet plus or minus of clearance, a little bit greater than what's out there today, and potentially, depending on where you put your support, more room in Waterfront Park, or maybe slightly less, where there's a balanced trade-off between the view shed above and the location of the support. But it comes at a potential challenge to the historic district's vertical limit, which is set at basically 75 feet, because the arch itself would extend above that. And then depending on where you put the support, it would either get even more and more above that 75-foot threshold. And really, this discussion is very similar to the truss. So there's these questions of how the truss or the tide arch meet each of these different objectives. So it's this combination of trade-offs between a tide arch clearance, a tide arch height, where a column is placed, and each of these different options play out to have a different solution as it relates to the criteria. All right, next slide. So then we get to the cable supported. And similar to what we were just talking about, the tide arch, you have different possible support locations for the cable stay. A different level of distinctiveness, this modern design, very, very modern design of a cable stay, framing right up against the historic district. And what does this mean? The towers of the cable stay are the tallest of all the different heights that are within or near the historic district. And yet it provides that distinctive style. And again, where do you place the column so that you have a balanced cable stay, which is where if you put a support in the middle of Waterfront Park, again, similar loading on either side of the tower so it's balanced, or you have an unbalanced column situation that makes the column even get taller and bigger because of the much longer span that's towards the river versus the back span. So there's these questions of cost, and cost comes into play with the cable stay of this, especially with the unbalanced version of it. All right, next slide, please. So then, even this is really just a summation of all those different options and how best they can preserve and enhance the integrity of Waterfront Park, or think about the future. Because again, what's going to be in this space is going to be here for 100 years. And so Waterfront Park is going to be responding to that reality over time. And so there's quite a few criteria elements that talk about the use of space and the ability for bicycles and pedestrians to have view sheds and the openness of the park. So there's going to be quite a bit of those conversations as you look at the criteria, the way it's unfolded. Next slide. Then take a step back, and there's a question about what about at night with lighting. And through this process, we found that you can do a lot with lighting. And so the question is the type selection process, how important is it to consider lighting, knowing that each of the different options have different solutions across the country with different lighting options? I especially like the truss option because you can see in the foreground the truss and its lighting option, and in the background you can see a much more modern bridge, suspension bridge with different lighting options. But each of these different options have the ability to be lit in a certain way, a certain characteristic, and there's options there. So one of the questions is how important is that in terms of selecting the actual bridge type? All right, next, please. So then it's all about context, and there's the criteria about working with on the west side, historic district, and the way that the bridge frames in. And these are different perspectives of how different options frame into the historic district and provide the vertical clearances and the room for all the different facilities and transportation uses, or the areas of no work zones for the CSO pipe, and how do you avoid the geotech hazard zone? So how does all that work together with these different bridge options? Similar to, if you go to the next slide, the east side that has its own set of parameters, particularly about the liquefiable hazard, the geotechnical hazard zone, and what that span length means, and where do you place the support relative to it, and how do the different options look and feel compared to the buildings on the east side versus the historic shorter buildings on the west side? All right, next slide. All right, so I think I satisfied my time quotient, but bottom line is all of those slides were meant to help present interests that we've heard you guys talk about. We wanted to echo through graphics so they can put you in a mind space for the different measures and really how we want to look at scoring each of these different options, making sure that we're reflecting back on what we heard from you. So with that, I'll stop there and pass it back over to Allison and Heather.
Great. I'm going to pass it over to Heather in a second, but just want to briefly pause and give a little bit of space if anybody has any questions. I think we're hoping to focus most of our meeting tonight on the next topic, but just do want to note in the chat that Peter noted that one of the slides looked a little different. There are some final tweaks and the content should be the same, even if the slides appear to have slightly different graphics or be moved around differently. But are there any questions for Steve before we move on?
I want to, this is Peter, if you can hear me, there was, the reason I asked about the difference on slide 24 is that in the middle of a slide that was sent to us before, there was a middle drawing there that talked about partial views, and I didn't know whether that was an option or not. So that's why it wasn't just that it was different, but it had a middle drawing there that I wasn't sure whether it was an option or not. So that's why I asked.
Cassie, can you go back to slide 24? I'm sorry, I'm not remembering which one that is, and I think I could probably answer it if I'm mentally guessing at the correct slide.
No, it wasn't that one. I'm sorry. Well, that's your slide 24.
23.
It was slide 24. Yeah. Keep going back. That one.
This one.
Okay.
No. One beyond that. 22. Yeah, there was another drawing, Steve, that you had in there in the middle.
Yep, I know exactly what you're talking about. So I will say I made a mistake when we first put out this graphic. There is a third option on the bottom half that showed a single truss line right down the middle of the bridge. And early on, we were contemplating, could we get something like that to work? The reality is by putting a single truss line in, it makes the deck itself super thick. And on the west side, it made it so thick that it made the vertical clearances even more challenged and wasn't deemed to be feasible. So in this final version, we removed it to put back. So we didn't want to confuse the conversation today. But these are the two options that we're really talking about: is an open deck or an option with twin arch lines.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Yep.
Thanks. Fred, I saw your hand waving. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Can we go to 29, slide 29?
That's the one that shows the east side foundation. Some time ago, and you mentioned it again very briefly, but you mentioned the load, the liquefaction load that can put, on the foundation. Have you done any more research on that you could say which one of these, the tide arch footing versus the stay cable footing, is more challenging from that standpoint, or another way to put it, has greater risk?
The simple answer is they're both basically the same. So you can see a subtle difference between these two graphics, and we did this intentionally, of where exactly is this deep foundation placed relative to the liquefiable zone. In the tide arch, it's placed further to the right. So it's closer to outside the liquefiable zone. With the cable stay, it's further to the left or to the west. So there's a variable that can that's going to be resolved in final design depending on which option is picked. Both of these require geotechnical mitigation, a single almost like island of protection around the supports.
Okay.
So basically the response to it is the exact same. The quantity of the mitigation changes depending on where you place it, and so it really comes down to a cost question.
Okay,
and
so there could be a cost. There could be a cost implication here.
That's right. And the trade-off for the cable stay, why did we show this one a little further to the west or to the left? It's because of when you move the tower further to the east or to the right, it'll make the tower even taller and make it unbalanced. And so this one, yes, it costs a little more underground, but it costs less in the superstructure above. And so the cost trade-off is equivalent. So it's a great fundamental design question of where exactly to place the tower. And it will come down to, frankly, a little bit of aesthetics because of this unbalance and a little bit of cost and economics because of where you place it. But fundamentally, they're exactly the same when it comes to the seismic resiliency.
Fred, thanks, Steve. Okay, I'm going to keep us moving. So we're going to pass it over to Heather. And we've prefaced this, but I want to make it really clear that what we're talking about tonight is that next step in the criteria development process where we look at measures. And we're hoping tonight to get to a place where the CTF can let the project team know that they feel that the measures that we're going to run through shortly are in a good spot to move forward. So we will be looking for some thumbs up from the group today. In the time that we have, and we're looking good on time. I think we are ahead of schedule right now, so that bodes well for the rest of the evening. Nice work, Steve. You did good. But Heather, why don't you tell us a little bit more about what we're looking at here this evening?
Sure, and I'm not going to take up too much airtime either. I think everyone is familiar with our process graphics. So as Allison mentioned, tonight we are going to be talking about measures. On the next slide, just as a reminder, are the general criteria topics that you all have identified that we have developed measures for. So we'll be stepping through those this evening. And then lastly, as you get to the next slide, before we get into kind of the real kind of nitty-gritty of our conversation tonight, I just want to take a moment to remind us all of the process we are in, really related to our criteria and measures development, because while it can be maybe a little wonky, it is really important. So I want to talk about the process for our criteria and measures development, the evaluation tool that we're going to use, and your ultimate conversations that are going to lead to a recommendation on bridge type. And, you know, when we started this process, we did that by identifying values and interests that led to identifying these criteria and ultimately the measures development. And we hope what we present tonight captures all of your input. I really want to acknowledge that some of what you have shared has been translated into the criteria and measures that we'll review tonight, but others really provide the context for your thinking. So some of what you're kind of seeing the clips on your screen, you know, you've really shared with us how the bridge should be a manifestation of Portland's values for things inclusiveness, resiliency, accessibility, creativity, vitality, and sustainability. You've said the bridge should really acknowledge its unique location in the center of the city, and that it should really, promote Portland as the city of bridges. Those are really, to me, kind of the heart and soul of the conversations that you're going to be having around recommending a bridge type, but they're not things that are necessarily things that we can put measures to, but they are still in the spirit of your conversation. And then as we talk about the criterion measures tonight, I just want to remind you about the guiding principles we have for the development of these criterion measures. And that's that they should really help to differentiate the bridge types, and they should be measurable given the level of design and information that we have during this phase. So as Steve reviews the criterion measures tonight, you'll see where the project team is recommending that some are not used in the scoring process because they don't meet those goals. And therefore we're recommending that they be held either for the next phase where they more appropriately fit in final design, or that they're pulled aside for your conversation when you have your conversation about bridge type. So it doesn't mean that these aren't important topics and they're not part of your considerations when you're discussing the bridge type recommendation. It just means that they're not best for the evaluation tool when you're trying to score and differentiate the bridge types amongst themselves. And I also want to note that you'll probably notice that, some of the criteria and measures are in conflict with each other, and that's okay. The process is really designed to accommodate those opposing interests, and it's really where your weighting is going to be key. And then finally, I just really want to leave you with when Steve and Allison walk you through this criteria measures discussion, I really urge you to think about are what we are actually going to measure, and to get to the things that are most important to you, to spend your time and energy confirming that we have the right measures and if we're missing any. And really try not to get too much into wordsmithing. I know it's hard. Words are good, but what we need from you tonight is direction on what we're actually going to measure to get to those things that are most important to you. So with that, Allison, I'm going to turn it back over to you and Steve.
All right, thanks, Heather. Paul, I saw your little smile when we talked about wordsmithing. We know that wordsmithing in committee is no fun, but we also welcome those suggestions. And if there are additional things that you're sort of sitting with later, as we get into our discussion, we might ask some of you to email us if you have specific suggestions on different words that could be used. So we hopefully don't get too deep into it. But your big question for tonight, as Steve goes through these, and he's going to go through these shortly, is really, do these measures meet the interests that we've heard from you about? So it's kind of a yes or no, like does this reflect the interests that you've shared with us? And do these capture what you care most about? So keep that in mind as we go through it. And the way this will work, if it is possible for you to be on camera, I can see all of your faces. I have my screen set up so I can see all of you. That'll help me. So I'll know if you're trying to wave me down or if you have something to say. So if you can come on camera, now is a great time to do it. Steve's going to walk us through the criteria and the measures and talk us through some of the rationale, as Heather alluded to. And we'll be pausing after each of these. And once we get your comments and your thoughts, and looking for a thumbs up from people. Do you feel good with this one moving forward? Do we need to have additional discussion about it? So instead of looking at the document in its entirety at the end, we're looking for your kind of approval as we go through, which hopefully will streamline the process a little bit more. And if we do need to continue at a later meeting, which hopefully we don't, but in case we do, we'll sort of know where we've stopped and we can pick it up fresh next time. So that's our proposed process. And Steve, why don't you walk us through some measures?
All right. You thought I was done talking to you guys. So maybe 2 minutes worth of orientation to the document. I don't know if you guys can all see me holding it up. This is the same thing on the screen. It was the same thing distributed. The document has 7 pages. And I know it's sometimes a little difficult to follow on a screen, but if you happen to have a printed version or a separate screen, it might be worthwhile. But let's do a quick walkthrough about what is this thing. So number one, page 1 of it is really exactly what Heather was talking about. It's these community values and how we're going to use this tool, how we're going to use this type selection evaluation criteria document. And starting on page 2 is really when we're getting into the criteria. That's what we're going to talk about the majority of the meeting So we'll get into all of that in some pretty good detail here in a bit. But Heather also mentioned the topics that are on pages 6 and 7. And so this pages 6 and 7 are those elements that are really important topics. But for some reason, there's one of two different reasons, we chose not to blend them into the actual evaluation. And so page 6, it's really because there's no differentiation between the options. Again, that point that Heather was making. And those are some really important topics in here that serve as foundational elements to making the type correct. But the truth is, every single one of the options satisfy this foundational important element. So whether it's seismic resilience, all the bridges are going to be designed to have the same seismic resiliency, similar to the comment we just talked about. Bike, ped, ADA, and transit users, the design details. Every single one of the options has the same cross-section. And that's going to be really important because you don't have one bridge type is better for bike, ped, ADA than another. They're equivalent. They're all going to have the same bicycle, pedestrian, ADA connectivity, whether it's the connection from the East Bank Esplanade or the connection on the west side. They're all going to have the equivalent connection. And so by design, we said we don't want to bring that into the criteria because it's not differentiating. The connection to, or the crossing over Burnside Skate Park, every single long span option crosses the same way. A single span over the skate park preserves the skate park or has a similar type of construction impact to it, the exact same way. And so we didn't feel that that was worthy of differentiation. Just like at Skidmore Fountain Max Station, we have the same solution for every single option over at the transit station. And so even though we talked about how important it was, and there are some super key design elements to it, it's the same. And so we pulled that out. And then there's some other, on the bottom half of page 7, some other elements that frankly, we just don't have the right level of information to be able to accurately assess. And so we didn't feel it made sense to dive into those elements to help pick. And they include personal safety. Again, we're at such an early level of design that personal safety is a design element. Sustainable design, how are we going to embed sustainability into every single one of these options? Well, we don't even know materiality yet. What kind of material type is each bridge in detail? We know that some might be concrete, others might have a little steel in it. But other than that, we couldn't land on sustainability as a driver for helping to pick type. You can satisfy sustainability with all of them. And then what I'm calling the secondary design features, the operator's house, streetcar elements, bridge overlooks, stormwater facilities. Many of these, well, especially like bridge overlooks, they're going to be on every option. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of how. In way to preserve or build in streetcar connections and the operator's house. Those are design elements that could unfold very differently as we get into the design phase. Could be an option that takes the operator house and takes it off the bridge, or it can be embedded into the bridge. It's a design element that really needs another level of detail to really be able to assess it. So we said, is it fair to bring that into a type selection phase with the basic form? And the answer we didn't think was yes. So all of these options, as really important as they are, we just didn't think made sense for helping to pick the type. So I wanted to talk about that because there's a bunch of details that are in this that were important interests by you guys that we want to make sure that is here, noted, is important, but it just didn't create a differentiation or we didn't have the level of detail necessary.
Steve, there is a question from Peter Finley-Fry in the chat that I just want to note. He says, each bridge type may be required to meet the same level of functionality for modes or seismic. However, is it possible that one may be far more challenging than another and compromises on the other factors required?
So I will say that price, cost is one of those things that usually is the differentiator when it comes to what is more challenging. So for example, the tower versus the bascule, the lift versus the bascule. we know we can design every single one of those to meet by definition, the precision of seismic resiliency. It just means that one might be thicker and larger, which is why we're representing it in the graphics we are at the scale we are. But that size of the members comes out through a cost perspective. And cost is one of the drivers. So from a fundamental design criteria standpoint for seismic, they really do all behave the same once we get to this stage for a long span alternative. It's just that the price to do so is going to be different. And so that's where that differentiation plays itself out. Now, if we thought that, now I will say this, there is something inside the criteria about sort of a human scale. So when you're on the bridge deck, and this will be a transition to get back into the criteria itself, the human scale of having, when you're walking on the bike pedestrian path and this gigantic tower there, well, we feel that that is important. That does affect user perspective and the bridge deck use, on-bridge use, and the context for which it sits. So we kept that in the criteria. But from a purely seismic technical standpoint, it will meet it. It's just a matter of how much does it cost to meet it. So, does that answer your question, Peter? Too much so?
Enough, I think, for now, Steve. Thanks.
Okay, so with that, why don't we go to page 2, or I guess on the screen, idea number 1. All right, so the first big bucket, and we're calling the big numbers the groups, is human experience and bridge surroundings. Another way to say that is the urban context, the site context. And so it comes down to 1A, 1B, and 1C. There are 3 different primary criteria topics. And the first one is on-bridge experience. How well does the option provide benefits to people when they're on the bridge? And so as we were going back through the notes and looking at ways to measure, because it's all going to come down to how do you rate this idea of option providing benefits to people, the interests that we heard were about clear views on the bridge deck towards other things. And so that's what the first bullet is within measure 1A1, is how well do you get clear views from the bridge deck to key features. And then the second way to measure this deck benefit to all people is through having a suitable bridge surface for public events, as well as, like I was talking about, these human scaled features that enhance the experience. So an example of that is, how large this mass is for the lift tower in the middle of the bridge versus having an open bridge like the Basco, where you don't have anything above the deck. And so we wanted to have a sense of measuring that amount of mass from your perspective being on the bridge. And then the third bullet that goes with this, and what I'm doing when I talk about bullets, I'm talking about the open circles, because those open circles are really the things that are how we're going to rate when it comes down to it. It's this notion of having an intrinsic gateway. And how important is it to have this marker on the bridge to say that you're entering or exiting one side of the bridge or the other? And so this was a question that we heard, but we were saying, we're not so sure that this is something that the CTF would want to say, that is it worthy of having a criteria that measures the presence and scale, the type of gateway on the bridge itself. But those 3 bullets were the 3 that when you come down to how do you rate this quality of on-bridge experience, it comes down to views from the bridge surface, the ability to use the bridge surface, and what does that mean, and this idea of entry monuments and gateways. So with that, I'll pause, and the question is, does that make sense to you guys? Do the way we measure this idea make sense to you? Are we missing something, or did we maybe, from your perspective, is this notion of gateway important enough to put into it?
Folks, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. You can raise your hand. You can let me know, how are we feeling about these measures. And if you're feeling like it's good as is, you can also give me just a little thumbs up in your video. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs. Thanks.
Okay, just a quick comment
Go
under
ahead.
measure 1A dash or dot 2. I don't see where, I'm not sure I know what you're trying to get when you're talking about enhancing the sense of arrival. It's you could put up a big welcome sign. I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish with that particular measure.
Great question. So really it comes down to, we heard exactly that there's these entryways, almost a physical marker that says you've arrived at, whether you've arrived downtown or you've arrived to the east side. One way that happens is you have possibly a tight arch, or you're going through it, or a truss where you're physically going through it. A different way to achieve that, if this is an important enough quality to measure on, is with the girder, is to have sort of monuments. We drove to the gorge over the weekend, and on the I-84 bridge into the gorge, there are some, maybe 12-foot tall sort of monuments on either side of the bridge that sort of marked a gateway as you're entering into a different space. So we heard this through the conversation about this idea, this interest and value of having something that marked the entrance to either downtown or entrance to the east side. And a tight arch or a truss sort of does it in one way, and it's much more diminutive if you did it with a monument on a girder. So that's the way we heard when we heard this sense of arrival, this idea of a gateway. It was the way that we felt we could measure it. Outside of that, it was difficult for us to figure out a way to actually measure that value. So the question really is, does that make sense to you guys to even include as a measure? And if it does, is the way that I just described it reasonable? Or is there another way?
So I'm kind of ambivalent about that one as well. I don't think it's as important. So my question is, when we agree to these being criteria, we're not ranking them yet, correct? I mean, there will be a time at which we rank these. Is that accurate?
You can take that, Allison, if you want.
I'm looking at Steve, but yes.
So right now we're trying to come up with, are these valid? Are these the right measurements to include? In the future, there'll be a conversation about a weighting factor that goes with the different criteria.
So the reason I wanted to clarify that is because if we feel sort of yes, but not as excited about one criteria as others, there will be a later time when we can rank them, is all I was trying to get at.
That's correct.
Yes, and I think, Heather, I saw you come on to possibly answer this if you wanted to.
You got it. Thank you.
I'd like to comment on this point while we're here. I like this criteria, the create an intrinsic gateway and enhanced sense of arrival for two reasons that I want to share with the group. I think of this not only as how we think of it for the human experience, going east and west over the bridge and how we arrive into these two neighborhoods into our city, but also how we arrive or go through the bridge if we're on the water as a visitor to our city, and that this is a very important gateway as it is Burnside. It's the difference between north and south. So I think there's some real importance there. And the enhanced sense of arrival that Steve mentioned, especially Steve, as you mentioned the bridge in I-84 heading out to the gorge. I'm on a group in Cleveland, Ohio about architectural interest, and there are more posts about some artwork on the bridge itself that shows a very important that you're going across a very important structure. There's just beautiful sculptures that have been done on these bridges in Cleveland, Ohio, back when in the Depression era, where we were putting artists' work similar to Timberline, and they are heralded over and over and over again. So think of it in terms of not only when you're on the bridge going from one way to another and how we can use particular enhancements on the bridge to show that sense of arrival both to the east side and the west side, but also as you're coming upriver or downriver and you're a visitor and it's marking that central place in Portland. So I think it's an important criteria.
Thanks, Peter. I saw some thumbs up kind of generally when we started to get into this conversation. I see a hand from Art. I'm going to go to Art and then Fred. Or Art, did you take your hand down?
Yeah, my video is a little bit weird. I kind of took it down. I just had a quick question about, or maybe a comment about gateway. That's a term that gets thrown around a little bit, and you know there are sort of designated gateway, like specific gateways, kind of capital G gateways in the city that that BPS has, and I don't know if if this is trying to get like that designation or just trying to be a gateway, kind of a lowercase g.
At this point in time, we were thinking lowercase g, something that identified or promoted a sense of, moving one direction or the other, not necessarily achieving what all those criteria are. It could be that in final design that it migrates in that direction, but not at this point. We're too early in the design process.
Yeah. And I guess my own kind of 2 cents about the comment about measure 1A.2 is just that I would really be in favor of the bridge design accomplishing a lot of these things. So I'm not really a big fan of kind of over signing something because the design sort of failed to do the job. So I think if the design can keep this in mind, and I agree, maybe it's not the highest priority, but I think it's worth having it in the conversation. I don't think it's worth deleting it because I think that the Burnside Bridge does define the city in a number of ways, and I think the design should accomplish that, and it should accomplish it through through the materials and through the shifts in scale. It shouldn't not accomplish it and then put a sign up. So, and I know that that's not what really the comment about the sign was getting at, but I would hate for that to be the way that it ticks off that box. Well, we put a sign up, so now you're there.
Thanks, Art. I saw a hand from Fred, and I also see a hand from Bill. So let's go Fred, then Bill.
Yeah, real quick. Yeah, I want to pick up on a point that Peter mentioned, and it has to do with the north-south views, particularly from on the water or on the river. One of our values is city of bridges. Okay, and I don't see 1B capturing as a measurable factor, how the bridge that we pick either frames the views, okay, or obstructs the views, okay. And I think that's very measurable, but it's not captured in what we have as measurable things here. And I think we're overlooking that.
Thanks, Fred. Let's go to
I
Bill
guess I would ask as a
follow-up.
as a follow-up to that. So that's one, I guess that's embedded a little bit into the first bullet, the clear views from the bridge deck to key features, including, and then it goes into a litany of different elements. Coming up later is a perspective of how the bridge sort of stands on its own, but relates to the various bridges upriver, downriver.
Yes.
So that one is coming up in a little bit. So if that's where you are going with your comments, maybe we hold it to say, did we capture that very well in a future criteria? But if that doesn't, then I certainly think that we should be talking about adding something to your point in.
Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Steve. All right, Bill, over to you.
Yeah, I'm looking down the road a piece and being mindful of the trending replacement on I-5, Steve. All right, so we have the lift bridge option. and in terms of a human experience, how are you going to replace the trunnions or the shivs at the top of the tower? Are you going to put cranes on the bridge, or are you going to do it from a barge off to the side? I mean, I just was going down the path. How are you going to how are you going to replace the shivs 40 years from now? I mean, is that an issue?
You're asking me a hard question when we haven't even designed the bridge yet. It is complicated. I'll call it the ropes and shivs all together. One of the things that is embedded into down into the cost section is a nod towards designs that minimize long-term maintenance and inspection costs. And so it's one of the things that when you get to in section 3, as we start looking at the different bridge types, yeah, the cost to do movable bridge maintenance for one type or another will vary. And we'll be doing frankly a mock buildup on maintenance operations as part of responding to that, as part of the group number 3 question about long-term maintenance. So do I have a great answer for that? No. Do we have some sense of what that's going to be based on modern design? Yes. And that's where our movable bridge team is going to be providing a lot of input on how best to do that for a very modern design.
Okay, thanks.
Other questions, comments from folks? Okay, your nonverbal body language is indicating that so are folks feeling good with this, with the kind of additional consideration thought that Steve has provided? If you can give me a thumbs up that you're feeling good about this one and we can move forward. Neil, how about you? To the side, okay. Good enough. I can't hear you, but I'm thinking maybe good enough to move forward, but noting that it's not quite there for you.
No, it's sideways, Allison. Yeah.
Yes, I can see that.
Go along with it. I just don't think that 1A.2 is necessary. I mean, it just seems like a lot to do about nothing. Just an opinion.
Thanks, Neil. Tasha and Susan, I think you just came on camera, but you're feeling good about this set. Yep. Okay. Great. So I'm seeing from folks on the chat, thank you, and from people I can see, we're kind of good on this one. Let's keep it moving to the next set. Thanks, everyone. Also, my internet's getting a little jumpy, so Steve, let's work together here in case I briefly disappear.
Sounds good. Keep the collaboration rolling. All right, so 1B, still about overall site context. 1B, below bridge experience. So this is about the relationship of the surroundings, immediate surroundings of the bridge to the bridge itself. So the first is all about the elements of Waterfront Park and the compatibility and usefulness and well, the connectivity between the park space and the bridge around it. And then the second piece is really about the view of the bridge from the park itself. So it's all about, well, the park or East Bank Esplanade, so really the parks. So in the first, in measure 1B1, it's the interest of this is how well can the ultimate bridge construction preserve the integrity, really enhance the functionality of it based on the first open bullet, column locations or spaces that improve personal safety and provide adequate sight lines and clearances. So it comes down to the interest of creating a space that's safe and functional based on where the column's placed. The second open bullet is really about the ability to use the space regardless of where the column is placed. So it's the more overall openness, the more that you'll have the ability to activate that space in there. So this is where subtle, and they're similar but subtly different, because you can be safe with the column placement and still have more of a limitation on the overall use. Think of, I heard at one point the idea of a theatrical experience underneath the bridge. And so depending on where columns are placed and the kind of size and type of them, it could have a different response. The third is this idea of an urban roof. The actual bridge itself creating a structure of an urban roof that enhances the underbridge experience. So it's vertical clearance. So you kind of have in this the different ways in which the placement of the support and the height of the support and the type of bridge could change the experience in Waterfront Park. So this is in contrast to having the value of open, clear views above the bridge deck. So by design, these two are meant to highlight a trade-off. This 1B compared to what we were just talking about in 1A. And then in measure 1B2 with the open bullets, this is, so it talks about how well the option enhances the park's in-water use by minimizing the bridge in-water footprint and maximizing visibility. But really the measurement of this is the scale of the piers in the river versus your perception of it when you're in Waterfront Park or the Esplanade. And if you go back to some slides, and there was particularly some slides that we showed at some of the UDOG meetings, that depending on what bridge option you can have this really large column support close to Waterfront Park, or you could have it further away from Waterfront Park. And the scale of it really does change kind of the perception of the bridge based on the overall size and massing of the piers. And so it's this geometric sightline. How well does the location of the piers and the type of pier change this sort of sightline and context as you're, in either one of the parks, the East Bank Esplanade or Waterfront Park. So that's what this is how we were looking to measure these different topics. So pause there. So this is all about the use in the parks. One side Waterfront Park, the other side East Bank Esplanade. A little bit less on East Bank Esplanade just because it's a linear park, but we tried to capture those differentiations.
So thoughts on these? Do these capture your interests? Is there something missing? Do they feel good enough to continue? Yes, Fred, go right ahead.
The 75-foot height restriction in the Skidmore Old Town plan. I know there's been controversy on this issue in the past. At one time, it was proposed to raise it to 130 feet. Is the 75-foot still firm? That is the guideline?
Yes.
Thank you.
I knew Peter would have the answer.
It is firm. And by the way, that one is specifically part of 1C, the next criteria we're going to talk about.
Yep, Ed Wardman, go right ahead.
Relative to this measure 1B2 and the river, I will refer back to the comment I think Fred made before about enhancing the experience from the river itself. If you were a visitor or anyone traveling up and down the river and the experience there. When I started reading measure 1B-.2, I assumed it was going to refer to that because up above, right at the beginning of 1B, it says flow bridge experience, provide benefits to people when they're under the bridge in areas such as parks, roads, and the river. But then I understood Steve to say that no, this is really focused on the experience from Waterfront Park. And I'm confused about why there isn't a measure in here that relates the experience from somebody that's on the river itself, passing under the bridge or looking at the bridge. Or is that somewhere else?
That's exactly what my answer is going to be. So When you get to 2B, so when we're talking about the bridge itself, and it's similar, except in 2B, it's really about from the river perspective. So it's a combination of a volumetric comparison of mass in the river piers and the proximity of mass to the river surface. So that's where we sort of take it from the river's perspective as opposed to waterfront park's perspective. So I think we'll get to your point as we move into topic 2B.
Well, maybe the words that are a little confusing was where you start out with 1B says below bridge experience. How well does the option provide benefits to people when they are under the bridge in areas such as park, roads, and rivers? Maybe that needs to be more specific in areas such as waterfront park. Was putting and the river there makes me think, well, this is where it's going to be addressed.
I think that's a good comment.
Some nodding heads from folks too. So thanks, Ed, for that. There's a question from Peter Englander in the chat. I thought that 1B2 was where we were wanting to enhance fish and other natural habitat. I believe you're referring to the conversation we had a couple meetings ago looking at the criteria topics. Steve, can you speak to that?
Yes, I can. So that is going to come in 2C2. And this is where I will say this, it did get, as we were pulling all this together in trying to avoid having a duplicative criteria, we had to make a decision on, does it belong here or does it belong there? And so as the conversation unfolded and we sort of unpacked the record that you all had when we were talking about it, we found that it was more applicable to 2C2, which is why we left that portion over there. It's coming down the road as well.
Cool. Sounds like he sees it, so thanks for that. Other questions from folks? How's the temperature of the group? How are you feeling about this set? Got a thumbs up from Neil. Thanks for that, and some nodding heads. Anybody? Thanks, Jane. Anybody, I guess, not feeling comfortable with these? I think we have a suggestion of some slight wordsmithing from Ed Wortman. Thank you, Peter. Anybody not feel comfortable and want to share a comment or question or clarification? You guys are great. Just I'm seeing some thumbs up all around. Okay, thanks, Susan. All right, I think we are good on that one then. So let's keep it moving, Steve.
Yep. Okay. So now next we'll talk about 1C, and this one relates to how does this bridge connect? So it's connection to the historic district, connection to the east side, the various elements, the central industrial district, central east side industrial district, or Kearns and Buckman neighborhood. So we wanted to treat these separately. So in measure 1C1, it's really about this, how it complements the existing building heights and the historic building styles. This is where that 75-foot criteria comes directly into play, and how the bridge relates and complements the criteria on the west side. 1C2 is the same, but for the east side. Complements the existing building heights and complements the modern building styles. So this is the one where we're trying to directly address each one of those sides. Now, 1C3 is where we don't use the word complement anymore. We move towards distinctiveness on its own. And so this is where, and frankly, this was a bit challenging for us, because remember when we were talking about this before, it was all about how the scale and form complements and responds to the characters while being distinctive. And so the way we broke this is into those different sections. Complements on the west, complements on the east, and yet distinctive unto itself. So that's how we developed our different criteria for this 1C. So what do you guys think? Because this was an easy task in this particular case, as we were studying how best to do this. And we know that in some ways, you could have conflicting scores based on your types.
Neil, go ahead.
Yeah. Steve, if you're trying to match the new bridge up with the neighborhoods, you'd have the west side of the bridge looking like the old London Bridge and the east side of the bridge supported by hovercraft. because one's really old looking, one's really new looking. And so to do one bridge that matches both, that's going to be a difficult task, I think.
I'm not going to disagree with you. And in fact, in a lot of ways, you might have for one C1 and one C2, a 5 for one and a 1 for the other, right? Just because of the nature of it. Now you could have, and this is where, how does a girder on one side and a cable stay or tight arch on the other side, how does that respond? And that one might score differently than having the exact same type on both sides. So
I was actually thinking about that very thing, Steve, but in visualizing it, I just think that would be like one group of engineers built half the bridge and another group of engineers built the other half. And I don't know if that would work exactly the way, it wouldn't accomplish what you're trying to do, I think.
But then you get to number 2 and you look at the overall look and feel and you say, no, we can't do that.
Nailed it, Jane, and that's exactly right. So that's why there are criteria that are looking to, again, respond to key interests. So we weren't developing this in a way to say, okay, this one is going to score this way. It was really, what is the interest? The interest we heard was this notion of complementing respond to the west side, the east side being distinctive. That's here. Then in group number 2, it's about the bridge itself. And it could be that the overall scores, depending on which option you're talking about, build each other up or they counteract each other. We don't know yet. In a lot of ways, that's going to come down to the weighting factors.
But Steve, I mean, it seems like the way that this is being proposed is that the entire bridge needs to respond. And I don't know if that's realistic. Like, it seems like you can have a cohesive design that at the pedestrian level responds differently on one side than at the other. I don't know if the entire bridge structure needs to be high on one side and low on the other, but that seems to be the way that this reads.
Susan, go ahead.
So, Steve, I'm trying to understand this a little bit. So when you're saying it complementing existing building heights on the east side, I'm talking about, but you're putting in the proviso of what the maximum height limit is. Are you talking about the existing buildings that are there, kind of the more low relief on most of the east side currently, with a few exceptions, or are you talking about the potential for many towers? What do you mean there with complements existing?
Well, our original thought was knowing knowing that there's a 250-foot limit that's very different than a west side. It was about understanding that and the complement to the buildings that are there now, being under construction now, in planning now. So think of it as the skyline of whatever the option is relative to the buildings that are on the east side. So how there's the yard, a prominent building adjacent to the bridge, and how does this bridge, the yard, and then the other 5 MLKs and other projects in development or in planning, how does that work together? And so that was the intent behind that.
So, but I'm still trying to understand this. So are we talking about that we're just focusing on the taller buildings on the east side as being what you're complementing, or because there's many low relief buildings on the east side that are still there and aren't going anywhere anytime soon. So are you saying, well, we're not looking at those, we're only looking at anything that's tall?
We're looking at the balance between them. Well, at least we're trying to score against the balance of those. So as the way that we were contemplating, setting up rating factors is you take a skyline perspective of it, which is going to be a series of tall and short buildings. And then how do the different bridge options, relate, look, feel against that skyline of different building heights on the east side? And then, so that was going to be our perspective on this. So that was, but again, we wanted to get through this conversation first to say, does that make sense? Is there something else we should really be considering in these bullets that don't exist today as measurements?
Okay. Additional comments, thoughts? Are Steve's explanations helping? Are there things that you feel should either need further explanation or should be taken out or added?
This is Paul. So far, things I've been hearing, they sound okay, and I don't have anything that should be removed. But everything, I realize everything feels subjective, and everything seems to be based on, personal opinion. So in some ways, these measures don't seem sufficient enough. Are these the words that will be used to score, or will there be another level? Because if this is all we have, and I think we need something more specific.
So the intent is with these words, the next question is, okay, so I'll look at the first open bullet, complements existing building heights. What's a 5? What's a 3? What's a 1? And the historic building style. What's a 5? What's a 3? What's a 1? And so, that's the next step in getting into this is how do you rate this? So if the sense, and I'm actually hearing this sense too, that there's something missing still in this category, that there's something measurable that isn't captured in this, then it feels like we need to go back and look and try to extract what is that missing ingredient still. Because that's what I'm sensing. I'm sensing that we're not quite there yet.
I think part of it may be going back to the whole debate about those words, complementing and responding, that we all maybe look at the word complement in particular in different ways. And that may be why it's just feeling awkward.
Yes, I'm reticent to get us back into the complement versus respond conversation, because I think it was slightly painful for everyone. But again, I think, Jane, you raised a good point that there was always some tension there that we sort of tabled, and it keeps coming up and bubbling up in a lot of our conversations. I also just want to remind folks that, I think Heather mentioned this, but any score that comes out of this, as things get weighted and as different alternatives are kind of scored against each other, it's always just a tool to help you have your conversations. Like, it doesn't necessarily indicate that this will be, whatever the computer spits out or the engineer spits out, that's the answer, but it's always a tool for you to have conversations on your recommendation, on the road to a recommendation, which might take a little bit of the pressure off getting it totally right. But again, I think Jane's right that there's something kind of missing here. Steve, I don't know if you want to weigh in on that or if other folks have ideas. This also could be one where we maybe come back to it with some thoughts. Tesha, you popped on screen. Do you have something to add?
A couple thoughts in this conversation. One is that I feel Steve created criteria that reflect the things I've been hearing. I think from a personal note, the thing that's missing for me is that if we're rating each side, we could have a very asymmetrical looking bridge. And I think, and I don't know if it's like just a section of this group or the whole group, but I think symmetry is a piece that we're interested in, and maybe it's in a different section. I don't know if that helps clarify things or just makes the conversation even more complicated. But that's for me the piece that I'm like, I could see us rating like, yeah, we really like this size here and this size here, and then the whole thing doesn't work together, which I think has been said. So.
To your point, Tesha, the very next thing we talk about in group 2, the first open bullet you'll see is exactly to your point, where we talk about the same bridge type on each side. So you're exactly right. This is a place where, as we talk about balance and unity versus symmetry, but similar bridge types, could be in direct contrast to the rating for this particular section. So it goes back to the point that Heather made that there will be different criteria embedded into this that are focused on different interests that oppose each other, and they neutralize each other. And the way that it plays out is either A, just like Allison was saying, this is a tool, or B, you can choose to put a weighting factor in for this, how does it relate to the existing areas small, and you can make the overall balance a high weighting factor. And then all of a sudden it swings it towards that interest more so than the others. So again, that's a way to overcome some of this, so a little bit of an anxiety over, are we going to end up with a score that ends up with Frankenstein Bridge? Well, even if it does, you can go back and say, okay, well, that's not the outcome we wanted. Thank you for the tool. We still feel this. It helped you get to an expression of a recommendation, even if the score doesn't perfectly align to it.
Yeah, and I want to recognize that I think for me, like, I'm fine moving forward, understanding that. I don't think there's any way we can have this conversation and not have measurable criteria that is going to be a little bit conflicting.
Peter Englander popped into the chat a little bit of etymology on the word complement. And I do like that it completes, it enhances, or it makes something perfect. And a little bit like we're trying to do with our measures, them as perfect as possible. How are other folks feeling? Are you feeling like we want to talk a little bit more about this? I think Steve's right. There's a sense that there's something kind of missing that could come up again in the weighting, and we sort of just defer this conversation and keep working through that tension. Or do folks want to try and add something in today or share any ideas? I saw a couple people go on screen. Fred, I see your hand, but I've also heard from you. I've seen Dennis come on screen and Mike also come on screen. So I'm curious if either of you have thoughts that you wanted to share. I'll go to Fred.
I'd like to just move on because I think some of these comments might be addressed further into this. And just, I'm looking at seeing the overall picture before I weigh in too much.
Cool. Thanks, Dennis. Fred, go right ahead. Fred, did you have a comment or question?
Were you referring to me?
Yes, I thought I saw a hand from you.
Okay, good. Well, I'll hold my question and see if it comes up later. It has to do, we have measurable criteria regarding the neighborhoods, but we also have the issue of how well the bridge fits the a civic criteria, a citywide criteria. We've related it to the other bridges, which I think really is a key point. But it came out in all of the discussion by the urban design working group, talking about the civic importance of this structure, and I think it's even states that in the transportation initiative. So, Steve, where do we have a criteria on that, or measurable criteria?
I didn't totally track with your question. Can you repeat it one more time? Because I think at some level it's tied to the distinctiveness compared to the adjacent existing bridges in 1C3, but maybe I misunderstood your question. Do you mind repeating it?
Had to unmute again. It's how it relates to the connecting the city as a whole, or being something that is I don't want to say a signature project, but it's unique as a element of the city as a whole.
So I think that really is, so that is the intent behind 1C3, the distinctiveness of the style. Now, maybe the words aren't quite there to convey what you were going for, but that was really, I think, the spirit of what that 1C3 was, where it's this sort of unique, distinctive, stand on its own facility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep, that's how you're interpreting it. You've caught my concern.
Yeah.
I'll offer one more thing that's come in through the chat. Michael Fitzpatrick, different Michael, who is our bridge guy on the call, shared some thoughts that this piece that we're sort of struggling with could be about massing and scale. You notice that the west side is low-level brick buildings and the east side is tall steel and concrete buildings. So it could be about the massing that fits that context, which also Michael has spoken like a true bridge person. But folks, I'm kind of getting the sense that it'd be helpful to move on and to continue to look at the other measures that we have ahead. And we can always come back and noodle on this a little bit more if folks feel that the spirit moves them. That's getting a strong thumbs up, Jane. Anybody else? Okay, let's keep it moving then, and we can always come back to this one or have the team noodle on it a little bit more.
So we're moving on to the next group. And so again, the first group was all about the areas sort of around the bridge, the context. This group, overall look and feel of the bridge, is the bridge itself. And in some ways, there is a little bit of, well, it feels similar. And so we had to make some judgment calls on how best to place some of these ways to measure this thing that's difficult to measure, aesthetics. So we did our best. So this very first one, 2A, is about, I think just like Tessa was saying, the overall bridge's look and feel to create a sense of balance, unity, and flow from a bunch of different views. The bridge itself, and how well does it do that? So the way that we described the methods to do that is A, measure something kind of simple. Is there the same bridge type on either side of the bridge? As opposed to a Frankenstein thing where you have one bridge type over here, another bridge type over there. This idea of having the same bridge type on both sides promotes this sense of balance and unity. The second way to measure that is this notion of avoiding this vertical obstructions. And so obviously this one is tailored a little bit towards the lift, because what does the lift do when you're looking at the bridge? Well, it obstructs, it creates a barrier behind a continuous flow. And then the third really is that, creating a seamless structural flow between the major bridge elements. Now, some of that is embedded into the final design, but really with the bridge overall form, there's a way to create some flow that can enhance this idea of a balanced, unified bridge, these three bridges in one. So this 2A was really meant to do that. How do you create measurements that really highlight the fact that you have complementary shapes and flow and this unity? So that's really what 2A is all about. The question is, does that make sense to you guys? Did we hit that 2A?
Ed, go right ahead.
I'm a little bothered by that one that the point that Steve just referred to about the ability to avoid vertical obstruction within the middle span. It seems to, on the face value of that, it seems to be a real criticism of the vertical lift as a valid option. And I'm just wondering if there's another way to phrase that somehow if there were a vertical lift span, that somehow the towers would somehow complement or respond to, whatever word we want to choose, the other parts of the overall bridge structure, so that they would not be what would be the word, kind of a contradiction or to the rest of the structure, but they would become kind of an attractive element that would be related to the fixed spans each side. In other words, is it possible to come up with a design for the vertical lift towers that would be a positive element, not just a negative element, as it seems to imply now.
I think it's a good comment.
So I'm just wondering if there's another way to state that particular measure to make it more neutral, well, in terms of how the design of the towers relates to the design of the rest of the bridge. So there's not just a jarring, out of inconsistent element.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think certainly there's a way to reword this. There's many ways to reword something. I think the question is really in the application of the intent behind this. And so as you're thinking about a cable stay and, the towers as it relates to a cable stay could look more unified, balanced because of the nature and scale and shape, then maybe it looks with something else, a tide arch. So the intent is how well does a set of lift towers work with the supporting fixed bridges that are framing into it. Yeah, so certainly the language can be changed to reflect that.
The way you just said it is more appealing to me. It's less of a kind of a negative slam of the towers, but just a way to how do the towers fit in with the rest of the design.
Okay, we can take that on. Thank you.
Bill noted in the chat his feeling that 2A1 is critical and that all the bridge elements must flow together. Any other comments or thoughts from folks? I can sort of see your energy waning. It is about that time in the evening where this happens. So how are folks feeling? Are you just tired or are you feeling all right with this one and let's keep it moving?
I'm okay with it as long I agree with try to take the judgmentalness out of the second bullet.
Make it a little more neutral. Cool. Thanks, Jane. Tesha, we got a thumbs up from you. I see thumbs up from a lot of people. Anybody kind of feeling that they want to stick with this one a little longer or have anything additional to share? Okay, so that's a homework assignment for Steve and the team to work through that one. Susan, feeling good about this one? Cool, thanks. All right, then let's continue on.
I will say this to give everyone a little smile. 2B and 2C are the last two hard ones in my mind. Section 3, they're really pretty straightforward. Cost, maintenance, and then impacts during construction. Those ones are almost slam dunks, kind of simple. These next two are the last two, they call it, where we're converting something that's somewhat subjective into hard measurements. So hang in there. Let's see if we can get through 2B and 2C, and then I think we're home free. So 2B is about this. This is where we talk about a bridge representing the natural historic surroundings while also presenting seismically resilient modern design that sets a tone for the future. So we interpreted this to convert it to measures in the regards of 2B1, which is about, again, this volumetric, the mass of the piers and the location of that mass within the river. So it goes back to that conversation that we started earlier about, well, where do we start getting into the size and scale of the in-river piers, and then ultimately the in-river piers connecting to the appropriate superstructure. So just the overall size and scale of the bridge, and then where that mass is. That's the 2B number 1. 2B2 is really about the bridge itself and the modern design that goes with it. How well does, like the second bullet shows, the bridge represent a modern bridge aesthetic? A cable stay is obviously a very modern structure. A truss is not so much. And then the potential for exposing the bridge and movable mechanism. We heard this early on during the project interest, when we were gauging interest, and the idea that wouldn't it be cool? Would it be something great, unique, a draw to have something that actually highlights this movable component, doesn't just hide it and treat it as an afterthought that you're trying to avoid, but actually embellish and use this modern machine as part of the idea to define what it means to have a modern technology. So that's what 2B is, really these two combinations, very different ideas. One of them is about the scale and mass within the river, and the other is about a modern structure.
All right, folks, what do you think? Is that a thumbs up from you, Ed?
No, I had to make a point.
Go right ahead.
A question. I'll let Steve respond. I'm bringing up, kind of speaking for some of the folks involved in the project who are the historians and bridge preservationists, might ask, well, does the option, the type selection option, provide an opportunity to reflect the historic aspects of the existing bridge somehow? Is that opportunity available, or is that rejected in the bridge type that's selected means that we have to look ahead and not back? In other words, does it, for instance, someone might say, well, we could have a truss or we could have a bascule versus a vertical lift because it acknowledges that Burnside is famous for its bascule, bascule. So I'm just wondering if that reference to the historic status of existing bridge, whether that could be an additional measure.
Well, I suppose it's up to the group. So we were using expanding, I guess, on the term modern. That was embedded into this. That was the interest that we heard. If there's an interest to go beyond that, to not use the word modern or to expand it to be something else, I think that's open for discussion.
Yeah. Well, I think if we had input coming in from the cultural group, as you well know, there might be a recommendation to that effect. I'm just kind of foreseeing what we might hear from other people. Sharon and I have that interest ourselves. I think some of the other people on the CTF do too. So just curious of whether that's something that we ought to put down as a measure, and then we can decide how important it is later.
Yeah, it's interesting. So we did just holistically. So we embedded the historic in the historic district, right? So that was in the criteria before when we were within the historic district. But it wasn't so much about a drive for a particular bridge type like this is. So I think really this is a reflection of what this group wants. And if this group wants something to be expanded beyond the term modern, because this, I mean, by definition, we would be rating something that is more modern higher than something that's less modern, just by definition for the way that the criteria is set up. So if that's not what the group wants, then I think this is the time to talk about that.
Thoughts from folks? Go ahead and unmute yourself. Jane, I think I see you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just thinking that I don't think we've really talked a lot about that and what modern might mean to us, or contemporary, or really that as a value. I know that it has been talked about in other groups, but I don't know that our group has really said that is what we want. But maybe I missed that conversation. Because again, I think the word modern especially is, yeah, I'm glad it's actually in quotes and I'm doing the quotes, because I think that it is very, the eye of the beholder kind of thing of what is considered modern.
I can see Paul nodding along to that point, Jane.
Yeah, I don't think we did discuss that. I do remember maybe last meeting or the one before, I think when we were discussing which options should be carried forward for further review. I think some people wanted to remove the truss, and my sense was that they thought it was too old looking. That, but I don't know what their thought was, but that might have been when we started to potentially touch on this idea of what is modern. But I agree with Jane. We never discussed it, and I don't know if it's hard to define.
Thanks, Paul. Folks have other thoughts on that? Hi, Tesha. Yes.
I think I've heard two things from the group on this in the past, that there's a lot of interest in keeping some sort of a nod towards the original bridge, the history of it, and there was an open discussion of how to do that, especially as we're not actually choosing the design of the bridge. But then there was also a discussion about choosing a bridge that reflects that the city is going to change and something that will last into 100 years and not be something that people are wondering 100 years from now why we chose that. So I think maybe that's where the idea of modern came from. So yeah, maybe we take the word modern out and think like kind of a mix of respecting the past but looking to the future. And then just one other thing I wanted to mention is in measure 2B.1, it says while providing a sense of seismic stability and reliability. I'm wondering if we can take out the words a sense of and just have while providing seismic stability and reliability. That's all.
Thanks, Tasha. Couple of points to note in the chat to that effect. Mike noted that Ed's earlier point, a good example of that is the Savi Island Bridge and how the arch was selected for the new bridge to echo the style of the original bridge. Stella saying she's in favor of preserving sort of the historical elements. I think those nods that Tesha was speaking to. And yeah, I think we've had some also talks on the history and the layers of history on that bridge and the bridge that's out there and its history and bridges that were there before, the bridge that's out there. But I'm kind of sensing some discomfort with modern and the feeling that the group hasn't really parsed through that. So Steve, do you have any reflections or options for the group on how we might accommodate some of that discomfort? Or Peter Englander, actually, you're paying attention closely. Do you want to weigh in? Sometimes I read people's nonverbal body language, and I was just testing the waters there. No, okay, you're good. Sorry to put you on the spot there. Steve, over to you.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping Peter would jump into that one to buy me a little more time. Yeah, this is an interesting one. This is one that I know that at the UDOG meeting, I sort of pressed them on this particular point quite a bit because it does set a tone and tenor for bridge design. You know, when you think modern, you think cables. The cable supported options are considered, you know, sort of almost universally in the bridge world, a modern style versus something like a truss that is not as much. Tied arch, somewhere in the middle. I think exactly like to Mike's point, you know, there are different ways to look at a tied arch, and you can design it to have a look and feel of something much more modern, forward-looking, or something that's more classical in nature that has almost an eye to the past. So, you know, I heard a nod to the past with an eye to the future is what I wrote down over here as a way to help bridge this sort of balanced idea. And right now, the you know, using the term modern, yeah, it would basically mean cable stay would score high and a truss would score very low. And that's really the way that this would play out. And then girder and tied arch would fall in the middle. So if that's not what the group wants, then I think the term modern should come out and it should be something that's more descriptive like I was just hearing. So I don't have any great ideas at this point, other than I'm hearing that there's some discomfort with bias it towards a modern futuristic style. That's clearly what I'm starting to hear.
Sounds like Dave agrees with that. Who is that? Ed and Sharon? Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to just throw in a final comment here. I'm trying to agree with everything that's being said. I mean, I like the idea of modern, and I could see how we keep that in for aspects of the bridge which need to look ahead, and maybe use the latest technology and the latest materials and design concepts, but that still leaves the opportunity to acknowledge the old bridge and for instance, I mentioned before the choice between the vertical lift and the bascule, whether neither one is especially can be either modern or old-fashioned, either one, but selecting the bascule would be an acknowledgement, a reflection of the old bridge, and we could say, well, that's an old bridge. So that could affect the type selection, regardless of whether it's modern or old-fashioned. Is it the vertical lift versus the bascule? Could be some people might feel that it ought to be a bascule because that's what we have now and just reflect that. So anyway, that's it's not necessarily just the what modern means versus what old means. It's just the reflection of the character of the old bridge, which we're all used to.
Makes sense. Sounds like folks are generally in favor of removing modern, and I think I also heard some agreement and saw nodding heads to Tesha's other point, removing the words sense of regarding seismic resilience, seismically sound, whatever the other words were. So, and we also got a big thumbs up from Tesha. If we could lift those words that she shared on that sort of nod to the past, eye to the future. So folks, does anybody really disagree with that? This might be another place where we let Steve and the team kind of work through that. And we can, we have a hand from Art. Yes, go right ahead, Art.
Well, I guess I just wanted to be clear that modern, I think that overall there's an idea that that the proposed bridge shouldn't compete with the existing bridges. And I think when I read modern, I get a little bit of angina that this is going to be, right now, the Burnside Bridge is a pretty subtle bridge. It doesn't have kind of a profile that jumps out at you the way that some others do. So I think it's going to change. And so I think I have a little bit of fear when I read modern, especially when you see some of the modern bridges, that this will be some kind of lone standout modern bridge that competes with the other bridges. And I think maybe I would just say that if, I don't have any kind of fear of modern technology, but I think that the design needs to be considerate of the rest of the bridges.
Steve, you're sort of nodding and taking notes. We're also recording all of this to make sure that we really capture it. But Steve, I don't know if you want to respond to that, or if we want to get a sense.
I think we have homework to do. I think just collecting the feedback today was important. This is, I think it's been a good discussion, and I think we need to do a little bit of homework and then come back on this particular point. I certainly heard take out the word modern, replace it with something. We had a few ideas, some things that seem to make more people happy than other things, but I think we need to come back and bring it back.
Okay. Fred,
I just want to say that what I think is interesting is, I keep thinking about wanting it to be being attractive or fitting in with the other bridges and having a sense of I don't think of modern or old, more of is it there's some aesthetic about it that we want it to be cohesive and have some, I can't think of the right word because that's what I keep thinking, it's not attractive and it's not, but the idea that it's modern, I think, is very specific. And I'm glad that we had a bigger conversation about it. Yeah, here someone said elegant. I mean, there's something we want to say that we care about what it looks like in the end, that I think that's what it's trying to get at. But it was, again, seeming to be weighting it in a specific way that we hadn't really reached.
Okay, I'm seeing hands from Fred and Neil, and I also want to do a little time check and then check in with the group on where we stand. So why don't we go to Fred and then Neil?
Okay, yeah, real quickly. In 2B2, the best engineering practices, how to assess that. I'm just wondering whether we don't really have a measure there that captures it. What do we, is this based on the design boundaries, is this a one-of-a-kind design bridge that's going to be required? Or is it stretching the boundaries or the limits of design technology? So I'm just, is that important? I would think it is. And is there a measure that can be developed around that?
So as we were developing the measures, we didn't feel it made a lot of sense at this point to almost put the design in a box where they had to use the most innovative. And so we backed off of going down that path and defining what, call it innovation means, leaving that for a final design decision once you get to materiality and economics and all that. So we chose not to go there for that reason.
Okay, so you're saying it's really going to be similar. It's not going to be a differentiating measure.
Correct, because as we were thinking, how do you apply that to the various bridge types? Well, there's different ways you can apply it equally to each of the bridge types. And then we got into, except for the things that are, girder is, there's a style to it, a sleekness to it, a flow to it from a haunching standpoint. A truss is, you can only do so much with a truss. So we thought it was sort of captured in this notion of if the term modern was what people wanted, that you could capture it through that. I think we need to rethink that now, though. But we didn't want to tie the hands of the final design with having, call it the most innovative type of structure.
Well, you had spent some time early in our meetings talking about the leafs to the bascule, that it might be stretching the limits of design, or yes, maybe the mechanism or the trunnion. Are we looking at, we got to provide such a massive trunnion design here that, it's going to be difficult to fabricate it or something. I don't know. So.
That's right. And so with the options that we have, everything is within the realm of, it's not record setting. Okay. And therefore, yeah, it fits
what I want to hear. Not record setting. Okay.
That's right.
Let's get a comment question from Neil. I also want to note that timeless as a word is getting some love in the chat. But Neil, over to you, and then we're going to pause and time check.
Okay, I'll make this quick. Has anybody on the task force seen that poster of the Portland bridges? Just kind of a side view of all the bridges. As far as trying to design a bridge that would blend in or match the bridges in Portland, we've got them all. The Tilikum Bridge, the new Solvay Island Bridge, Steel Bridge. We've got every kind of bridge there is. So trying to match the new Burnside Bridge to what we already have is going to be, it would be the Frankenstein Bridge. So let's just build the best one we can, make it look good, functional, cost effective, and go forward.
Thanks, Neil. I do love that poster. All right, it is 7:58, and we are meant to be wrapping up our meeting in 2 minutes. We are really close in that we have one more kind of set of criteria in 2C, and then we have the threes, 3A, 3B, 3C, but as Steve noted, those are pretty easy. So I would anticipate that those would be more of a cursory glance. One option I'd like to put forward to the group is that we stay, if folks are able, we could stay a little longer tonight, work through our final criteria, and then the homework that Steve and the team have to do could be circulated via email. That would, because the next time we're supposed to come together is in March. So March 1st is our next scheduled CTF meeting. Another option, and I'll kind of float this by Steve too, I've been texting with other members of the team, but we have not had a chance to check in about this because we're on screen together, is if there's enough homework or if folks really would appreciate coming back together to talk this through, we could have another February, we could have a meeting in February. However, that's another meeting on Zoom, almost closing in on a year of the pandemic. So I hate to subject anyone to more Zoom meetings at this time in our lives. So I'm curious how people feel. we keep going? And Steve, do you think that we can maybe get through the next bit in 15 minutes or so? I don't want people to stay too late on a Monday night. Or do we really feel like another meeting might be necessary? I feel like I'm getting some love for let's just stay and finish it.
Need it or not? It's on now.
Let's keep going. Keep going.
Keep going. Okay, so
Allison, can we just zippity doo dah through this next section in 15 minutes?
let's do our best to do that. I think Steve is really good at zipping through stuff. I think we've talked enough about 2B. We've got homework to do there. So we're on to 2C. That's our last hard one. And then we'll just zip through the rest. So Steve.
All right, 2C. 2C is all about future flexibility in the design phase or adaptability in the future use. So the way that we interpret that is really two ways. The first is about this idea of a landmark, this bridge being a landmark, a beacon of safety, a destination, both day and night. And so, again, this one, it's kind of similar to 2B in that it's bridge form, but it's really how its shape influences the overall skyline. So this kind of goes back to, I think, that comment of, so where is that criteria about the bridge as it relates to the entire city? Well, I should have said this is really the one where that's the target. And the key to this is both during the day and at night, which is one of the reasons why I showed that picture of all the lighting earlier on in the presentation of, is picking the bridge based on the lighting of the bridge type important or not? So that's what the 2C1 is. 2C2, this is where the natural environment really hits the mark. It's about water surface elevation. So how does the pier itself change the water surface elevation of flood events and where the water storage is from flood events? How does the effect on birds, wildlife, fisheries, shallow water habitat, and then this long-term resiliency due to ever increasing water surface levels because of climate change? So in part, it's this sort of notion of skyline, day and night, and then the other part is around the environmental sensitivity as it relates to the bridge piers.
Okay, Dennis, over to you.
Yeah, I haven't seen any real mention of navigability in terms of the design of this bridge and future use in terms of height and width.
And in part, that's because it's a common design criteria across all bridge types.
Understood.
So,
okay, great. Thank you.
We did have one comment from Peter Englander in the chat saying that he would prefer enhance to integrate, that integrate feels a little too weak. Other thoughts from folks? Do you like that? Does that seem good to you? For ideas? I got a thumbs up from Tesha. Thank you. Also from Dennis and Neil. Okay, any other thoughts on this one? Comments, ideas? I know you're all really feeling the pressure now, but I also want to hold some space for thoughts that folks might be having. Okay, well, with that little note from Peter Englander about changing that word, are we feeling good about 2C and these measures? All right, that seems good enough to move forward. Thank you all for that. So Steve, I think we are coasting downhill from here on the rest of these measures.
all right, let's see if I'm right. So section 3, cost and construction impact. So 3A is all about project cost, project direct cost. What does it cost to design, construct, right-of-way acquisition, utility relocation, all those things. So it's really about cost. And the measure is really similar to what we did during the NEPA phase, and you're looking at alternatives, establishing some cost thresholds, some cost ranges, and then scoring based on just pure direct cost. So it seems pretty self-explanatory.
Do folks
Obviously,
agree?
the lower the better.
Feeling good on that one? Okay, I'm seeing nodding heads and thumbs up. Thank you for those chiming in on the chat. All right, then I think 3A we're feeling good about. How about 3B?
Okay. So 3B is, as opposed to cost for right now, it's the cost over time. So this is where the whole point is minimizing long-term costs and any costs for a bridge change. So what does that mean? It's costs associated with operations and inspections, routine maintenance, rehabilitation, deck wearing surface, repainting, lighting maintenance, repairs following a major earthquake, repairs following floods or vessel collisions, and then costs to support changes for the addition of streetcar, for example, or for a change in lane usage. So it really comes to what are all those different ways in which a future cost could be borne, and then how do the options relate or change based on lowering this long-term cost to the county and to the citizens. So again, lower is better.
How are we feeling? I'm seeing some nodding heads, some thumbs up. Okay. Oh, Neil, yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, just in 3B.1, one of the items points out repairs following a major event like an earthquake. Well, hold it. Isn't that what we're trying to avoid?
Yeah, it has to be operable, but there's different levels of earthquake. So there's one level that you would all expect, and then that's just, it's all there with minimal cost. There's even higher levels of earthquakes that the bridge is being designed to not fall down for, but they would require some additional servicing. So we put this in here because we figured there could be some elements of a bridge that would cost more to sort of respond to in that higher order earthquake.
Okay. I think we got a good enough from Neil.
Fair enough.
So folks feeling okay about 3B? All right, let's go to the last one, 3C.
All right, last one. So this one is about what is happening during construction. And there are a couple of different ways to measure this. So the first is about its effect on the duration of something. Its duration of how long the bridge would be out of service to users, how long it could impact freeway operations, how many nighttime closures or whatnot based on different types, the duration of transit detours, the duration of bicycle pedestrian detours. So basically, because there are some options that change the closure duration of the bridge, we wanted to build this in. And this is, we think, probably a really important criteria that could swing the pendulum in one direction or another. Not so much is it cable stay or is it tight arch, but how do you build and where are the foundations? So there's some elements to that are noteworthy to get into. The second measure is one that is a little bit of a question mark from our perspective, but we didn't feel we could call it something that doesn't compare well. It's about temporary and permanent right-of-way acquisition. There could be a scenario in which that would be a differentiator. And then the potential for quantity and disruption to utility service in and around the project site. So those two, while we're not totally convinced that they're differentiating, we wanted to leave them in the event that they are. So bottom line is 3C is all about impacts during construction, and does one bridge type and location minimize those impacts compared to another?
So it makes sense to me. The only thing is that, and I don't know where else you'd put it, but a permanent right-of-way acquisition isn't really about construction. So I don't know if there's a different place to put it, but you see what I mean? Like everything else there is about construction, but if you have a permanent right-of-way acquisition, it's a different category of thing.
That's a good point. And you can say the same thing about utility. So those two in 3C2, you could almost say, you know what, those are already covered in the direct cost in 3A1. So don't put them down below. It feels like we're maybe duplicating something that's already being captured in direct cost up above.
Right. It's a cost. I mean, I guess the question of like the permanent right of way isn't necessarily just cost. It could be, I don't know that there is one, but it could be an impact that is different than cost.
You're right, inconvenience as it relates to something. So that was the logic for putting it in here in the first place, as opposed to just keeping it within cost, because if on one option you can avoid the inconvenience cost neutral, then isn't that better to do that than something else? So that was the reason why it's there. Truth is, on 3C2, it's yet to be determined, is that going to play out to be a differentiator? It could be that everything in 3C2 goes away.
Yeah, got it.
Steve, this is Bill. I threw in a comment. I understand that if we take the bridge out, then 3C1, I mean, the traffic and pedestrians and bike people take care of themselves, transit, all that. But, I think we've talked about the East Bank Esplanade being affected. That's actually quite a different. That's heavily used, and there is no detour. Do you have some thoughts on that, or should that be in this criteria as well?
So from a pure bridge standpoint, the durations of closure to the Esplanade are the same across each of the different bridge types, which is why it's not in here. The question is, with the different ramp options, those could affect the timing of the East Bank Esplanade closure. But again, even that would be applied equally to all of the bridge types. So even though it's a really important element, it really is not a differentiator from a bridge type selection standpoint.
Oh, okay. I was thinking there might be an impact.
Yeah, it turns out we don't think it is, and in part it's because for the bridge itself, let's forget about the ramps, but for the bridge itself, you have separate durations, separate closure periods towards the beginning and towards the end over the Esplanade, where you just have to shut it down because of equipment and the overall construction sequencing directly above it. They turn out to be very similar across all the different options, to the point where it's not a differentiator between them.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to note that Dennis made a point in the chat asking if river traffic impact should also be included as some of the traffic impacts. Steve, thoughts on that?
Let me think more on that. I think it could, there's a chance. I mean, because just like it's not so much a duration-based thing, but it's the length. So in one option, you could be building north and south of the bridge, and so the extent at which construction would happen could be longer and provide more of a channeling effect. Let me take the note and then ponder if that would make a good addition into 3C1. I can see a chance of it, so I think that's good input. Let me look into it.
Thanks. Other thoughts on the 3Cs? We feeling good about those with some of the additional homework for Steve and the team to think through? I'm seeing nodding heads. Thank you, folks. Thank you for chiming into the chat. Okay, I think we got through all of them. So nice work. We did it in 14 minutes. So I am going to take a final couple of minutes just to talk about next steps. So we didn't come to an agreement on whether or not we should all come back together in February to discuss this. Mike did note that we are trying to avoid additional meetings to respect your time, but also it can take a lot to put all these together and to bring you together. So one option that we certainly could have an extra meeting in February if you feel like you'd like to talk these through some more. But one option is that Steve and the team could work through this and email to each of you what shakes out. I think we've gotten some good direction that these are generally in the right place, with a few places that they need maybe additional wordsmithing or additional work to really get to the points that you've highlighted this evening. So these could be emailed through, and you could let us know if that hits the mark or not. And then we would be coming back together March 1st. So folks, I guess the question is, would you like to have an additional meeting in February, or do you feel that reviewing these that are sent via email would be sufficient and we could come back together in March? I think I'm seeing more nodding heads for the second option of we email and we come back in March. Is that correct? Okay, that got thumbs up and nodding heads. All right, I think and there are a couple folks who are good either way. No February meeting. All right, you've spoken. We are not going to have a February meeting, but you will get an updated version of the measures document that you looked at tonight, and we will be coming back together in March. Heather's still here. So let's briefly talk about what else is coming up in the exciting month of March. We have a policy session, and we'll be meeting twice a month in March, also on the 22nd, to discuss the screening results. So Heather, do you want to say anything more about some of the good stuff coming up for the group?
I think you have covered it, and I really thank you everyone for your time. We'll get these out, we'll get comments. We will see you in March to share that input, and we're going to be weighting criteria. So I think there were questions tonight about, are these going to be weighted? It's yes, so that will be our exercise in March, and then we will move into the evaluation process. So great job team tonight, and great questions, CTF members, and thanks for hanging with us a little longer.
Thanks, Heather. And waiting is fun. I remember when we did it for the last round, we had a lot of fun with technology on that one. So I think we'll have a good time at our March meeting doing waiting together. Thank you all. That was 16 minutes over time. So Neil, we zipped through it. Thank you for that.